did you think you'd get in politics?
Wow, that's a good question. I think that really it happened at Thanksgiving.
Nothing before, you never thought of it?
Well, do you know what? I served on a school board for 4 years, and I served on Butler City Council for 4 years. And I really thought at that point that people going and serving could make a difference. The school board was an eye-opener for me because I realized at that point that was one of those things that people say is a thankless job. I don't think so. I think it's very important. I just wish that people were more concerned with curriculum than who was playing quarterback. When I got to Butler City Council, I looked at that and I realized, geez, you know what? 67 cents, Jim, out of every dollar that we brought in tax revenues was spoken for before it got there with public safety. So I said, how do you make this work? How do you fix your roads? How do you light the lights? How do you keep the parks open? How do you work with anything when you have that type of limited revenue? And I think every small town faces that. So you have to become creative. Now, we know in municipalities, they are limited. They can only raise taxes to a certain level, and then that stops. That's by law. The other thing they can do is they can go out and borrow money, and then they can adjust taxes to pay for that. They can borrow money and then have a tax increase just to cover debt. That's not a healthy situation. So when I looked at that combination, I said, wow, this is the way government works, or this is the way government does not work. This is the way government causes us to have a problem. And then I thought to myself, you know what? It's not the model. It's the people we're sending. It's the people sitting in the chairs that make the decisions. If you don't have any skin in the game, if you don't have any of your own dollars invested, it's easy to spend other people's money, but you got to be really responsible.
You believe in term limits?
Do you know what? Right now, the only term limit I'm considering really looking at seriously is Ms. Dow Kemper's. I'd like to limit her to 1. I don't mean that to be funny. I really do mean that we, voters, have the ability to limit the people in office. Now, term limits are certainly something that people are talking about very seriously now, and I think because of the way it's worked, they look at the history of it and they're saying, hey, you know what? Some of those people have been there too long. It was never supposed to be a career. It was supposed to be a service. And even George Washington, go back to the beginning, he said, hey, you don't need a monarch or a king. I'm 2 terms, I'm going back to my farm. Mike Kelly as a car dealer, as a small businessman, I'm very comfortable doing what I do every day. I'm just not comfortable with the direction the country's going.
George Washington, probably the last politician not to lie. All right, Gary.
Good morning, you're on Jet Radio. Still can't get used to the microphone. I've got to be on here, Jimmy.
I'm telling you what, waiting for 9 o'clock.
Yeah, my main microphone blew up this morning, so I'm having to use a backup microphone. It's throwing me all off of my game here, but that's all right. It doesn't matter because in the studio with us, we are pleased to have Republican candidate for the 3rd Congressional District, Mike Kelly, who is, of course, challenging the incumbent, Congresswoman Kathy Dahlkemper, in the November election, which is not that far away. And he's taking your calls, questions, and comments at 451-1400. Verizon Wireless customers, pound 41400. And back to the phones we go. And thanks for waiting. You're on Jet Radio 1400 with Mike Kelly. You're on the air.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
I would like to go back to the story of Mr. Kelly's said about why he got involved in the race and his auto dealership. I'm assuming that the instructions that Mr. Kelly was getting was connected to the auto bailout that happened of GM. Is that not right?
I'm not sure I understand.
In other words, why were they taking Cadillac away and telling you these things? That it had to do with basically the takeover of General Motors by the federal government, the bailout.
Correct.
Well, the instructions I got were from the guy that was our regional manager who said, now, hey, you know what? We no longer manage it. It's now being managed by the government, and this is the decision that was made. But, quite frankly, there's a franchise that was involved there. And you've got to understand that when you go back to 1953, when my father started with a little one-room showroom and about 4 service bays and worked 7 days a week to make it through that, when somebody calls you up and tells you that all that work, all that investment, all those sweat, tears, and those sleepless nights, that doesn't matter. Somebody else is smarter than you are, and they've decided you're no longer going to be in business. There's something just fundamentally wrong with that. Caller?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I understand that, but I mean, wouldn't GM have gone out of business without that bailout? Would you have expected the taxpayers to pay the money without any strings attached to GM? And wasn't it then successful in the fact that your business was still around?
Well, I think what happened, and whether they got a bailout or not, they still went bankrupt, did they not? So I think they would have been better to go bankrupt on their own. They would have been able to control it better. But again,
how do you know that? How do you know they would have been able to control it better?
Well, how do I know that?
They got themselves in the situation they were in. How would you trust them to get themselves out of it?
All right. Well, let me go this way because not a lot of people understand the market, and I don't mean to say that in any way to be disrespectful, but The market went from 16.5 million sales a year to 9.5 million sales a year. They lost 7 million sales. There's no model in the world that could have withstood that. Now, you could go under bankruptcy and restructuring. That would have left GM to fare on its own. They would have been able to make the cuts they needed to make, and the fact that they stayed alive wasn't due to the fact that wasn't government bailout. It's that they were allowed to go bankrupt. Now, who were the winners in that? And we all know who the winners were. So you look at that model and you tell me that it was government intervention that saved GM. It was government intervention that ruined GM, the GM that I knew, the GM that my father worked for from 1936 on. Now, we can kick that back and forth saying, what ifs, what ifs, what ifs. I'm just saying, hey, having been through it, lived it day by day, I would have made it through one way or the other because I'm also, in addition to be a General Motors dealer, I'm a Hyundai dealer and a Kia dealer. I also sell used cars, and I have a big service business and a body shop. So I do an awful lot on my own to sustain myself. So I really wasn't dependent on General Motors making a decision. I was more dependent on Mike Kelly making decisions based on what was best for the people that work with him.